Hi, I'm Frances Beaurivage from the EIPA Diagnostic Center, and we're going to bring to you today 5 of the top most frequently asked questions that I get about the EIPA assessment test.
It's been a number of years since I last took the EIPA, and my scores have not improved much. I interpret in the classroom every day, so I don't understand why my scores did not increase.
Okay, well that's an interesting question. I always respond to that by saying that when we are in the classroom on a daily basis, we walk in every day and we sit down, get ready to interpret, and we wait for the teacher to begin talking. And typically what we do is we pick our hands up and we begin interpreting, but we may be thinking about, okay, today I'm going to try to focus on this. But pretty soon as you interpret, you kind of go into what I would call autopilot. You do what comes easily and naturally. So what I recommend is to think about it this way. If you're a musician, and I'll use piano for example, if you are practicing a new piece on the piano and you have a trouble spot, my teacher always told me to highlight that trouble spot in your music and to go over that section repeatedly. And she always said that at first it was good to slow down, start very slowly, and then as you got more fluent and the fingering became natural, then you could speed the piece up until you were working at the pace that you would like to be working at for that piece of music in the appropriate time, such as 2/4 time or 4/4 time. So when you're interpreting, and suppose you want to focus on improving the production of your finger spelling, well, you can't do that by just walking into the classroom and saying, today I'm going to produce my finger spelling more effectively. What you really need to do is outside of the classroom, you need to be having very focused, deliberate practice on a specific skill set. So if you're working on your production of finger spelling, and maybe your report said that your finger spelling was inarticulate and too quick, so what you would do in isolation is that you would interpret a sentence that required a fingerspelled word to be embedded in it, and then you would practice delivering that sentence with the fingerspelling repeated times, starting out by delivering the fingerspelling the first time slowly, then doing it repeatedly and picking up the speed each time until you reach the speed that's appropriate for the age of the students that you're working with. So this kind of outside of the classroom practice is what will carry over into the classroom. So no differently when you're practicing a specific piece on the piano and you're just isolating that piece and playing it over and over, the same way you're practicing your finger spelling outside of the classroom, that skill set should become more innate and feel more natural, so that when it's time for you to fingerspell in the classroom, you will be able to transfer that skill into your interpreting and do it more effectively. And this would apply to almost any skill set that is recommended that you work on your EIPA report. You want to take that skill set, you want to isolate it, and you want to develop a series of practice activities that will help remediate that specific area, and then hopefully that'll carry over into the classroom, and the next time you take the EIPA, you will be able to hopefully see improvement in the areas that you have been focused on.
There is so much feedback on the report, and I don't know where to start in trying to develop my professional development plan. Any ideas?
Oh yeah, I have ideas, and you're right. The report that you get back, we are measuring and giving you feedback on 33 specific skill sets. So yes, it is a bit overwhelming to read the report and decide where it is that you should begin to focus your energy. So what I recommend is if you look at the EIPA report, we measure scores, and we put those into 4 different domains, and they're called Romans 1, 2, 3, and 4. Roman 2 focuses on your sign to voice skills, so I'm not going to talk about that. But Romans 1, 3, and 4 are on your expressive portion of your work. So what I always tell people is that Roman 3 focuses on what I call the foundational skills. You have to have very strong scores in the area of Roman 3 before you can work on skill sets in Roman 1 or in Roman 4. Often what people do is they will pick up their EIPA report and they say, I'm going to find my lowest score, and that's the area I'm going to work on first. And I can tell you that without a doubt, across the board, most of you will find your lowest score on Roman 4 under discourse mapping. Well, you cannot address discourse mapping without addressing some of the underlying foundational skills that all come together to develop a strong discourse map. So I tell people, look at your scores on Roman 3. If all of those scores are relatively high, then I wouldn't focus my time and energy there. On Roman 3, you might have one number that is related to fingerspelling production that you might want to focus on, because that's easy to isolate and focus on that. But then I tell people to look at Roman 1, which is labeled as your prosodic skills, the intonation, the things that give language rhythm, motion, fluency, emphasis, and stress. All of those scores are measured on Roman 1. So in looking at Roman 1, you still have to pare it down to what is an easier skill to work on. What can I work on in isolation that will be easy? One example might be that you may have a low score in use of facial grammar. So what I would say is you need to find some resource that you can look at where you can see examples of native deaf signers using facial grammar effectively so that you can observe what that looks like. You have to be able to recognize what the skill should look like before you can reproduce it in your work. So looking at native signers and their use of the language, and then taking what it is that you've observed and trying to apply that, not while you're interpreting, because as I've mentioned before, focused, deliberate practice outside of the classroom is the only way you're going to improve the product that you deliver in the classroom. So if you were working on those grammatical markers and you looked at native signers, or you looked at a print resource that might talk about what is the facial expression or what is the marker that is used on the face to show a WH question or to show a yes/no question, and then you want to develop sentences or questions, I should say, that are yes/no or WH questions, and you want to practice signing those in isolation and videotaping yourself. Videotaping yourself is so important so that you can look at your product and see what you're doing, because what we think we're doing and what we actually are doing may be somewhat different. So that's a starting point for how to look at your scores. So if you look at Roman 3, as I said earlier, and those scores are strong, then you can look at your scores on Roman 1 and select some from there. It is unlikely that you would select a score from Roman 4 to work on, other than maybe the one isolated score of how you show transitions between speakers, because that is another skill set that really is more about your knowledge rather than the skill of producing it. So those are just some tips to kind of help you get started in thinking about how do I pare down all of this information and focus on what's the most important thing I should be working on.
What does it mean when my report says I need to use more process time to analyze the incoming message? How much process time should I be using? What does it mean when it says I should be analyzing the message from the top down?
Okay, process time. It's either our friend or it's our enemy. It used to be in the field that we used to talk about using lag time, which insinuated that we were going to lag behind the speaker, and with the hope that we were going to deliver a more effective interpretation by using lag time. I like the term process time because it implies that you're working. So that means you're listening to the incoming message, you're analyzing it, you're thinking about what is the key point the speaker is trying to make, and then you're thinking about how to deliver that in a package that's the most effective. I use the example frequently of an interpreter that I saw on videotape one time. And I use the word interpreter loosely because she was really not qualified to be interpreting at the point when this video was produced. But what she did do was she was listening to a lesson, and it was a lesson about the Great Depression in the 1930s. And as she listened to the talk, she would stand there for fairly long periods of time listening. Then she would sign a complete sentence that was fluent and contained a good amount of information. So what I observed was she was actually listening to this message and pulling out the key points and delivering those incomplete sentences, which, if I connected all the sentences that she did deliver, it would look like I had a very good written outline of the teacher's lesson, but I was missing details. So that to me was a really good example of someone using process time for what it's intended to be used, analyzing the message for the teacher's key concepts and then delivering each of those concepts fluently. So I think when we're interpreting, we need to always be thinking about the incoming message and analyzing the message from the top down. And by the top down, we mean the pragmatic intent. So in the EIPA, we have always used this as kind of our symbol for talking about top down. We go, you should be interpreting this way. So you're going from the pragmatic intent to how the message is delivered to specifically what signs you are going to use to deliver those. If you're interpreting and you're thinking about, I hear a word, what is the sign for that word? I hear another word, what is the sign? And I am delivering my message in signs that I'm thinking are equivalent to what the teacher is saying. I'm not thinking about the pragmatic intent. I have to think about what is the teacher's goal and making sure that that is at the forefront of everything that I'm thinking about and planning my delivery from that top-down point rather than the bottom-up. If I'm thinking about top-down processing, that means I'm listening to what is the teacher's key point at this moment. How does this key point connect to the next key point? So that's all about that pragmatics. What is the structure of the teacher's lesson plan, and what are all the details that I need to include? So is there a one-size-fits-all for process time? No, there is not. The more complex the content, the more process time you are going to need to use to be able to fully understand the teacher's incoming message. Again, another thing that helps with that is preparation time. If you're able to get the teacher's lesson plan ahead of time, if you know the curriculum well, if you've had a chance to review the lesson that the students are going to be going over, your process time will be different because you will be prepared. I think about it like your desktop on your computer. If you've pre-planned, you've got all of the information at the forefront of your mind before you begin interpreting. So it's like you're getting all the information up on your desktop before you begin interpreting, which will require you to use less process time, hopefully, because you're better prepared to deliver the interpretation.
I am afraid to use very much process time for fear I will get too far behind. What is a good practice strategy to help me become more comfortable using additional process time?
Okay, process time is hard for many of us to use. We like to be right on top of the message, as I just spoke about, and that doesn't help us to deliver an effective interpretation. So I tell people, and I know this is going to sound like I'm asking you to work backwards. You're already interpreting in the classroom every day. But what I'm going to tell you is that by practicing retelling a text is better than simultaneous interpreting practice. So listening to a text or making a map or writing an outline of a particular text and then retelling the text, going at a pace that allows you to deliver the information in a very structured and effective way. That's the first step. After you've done a retelling of a text multiple times, it's helpful to practice consecutively interpreting that same text. So that means you're going to listen to a segment of the text, then you're going to pause the tape or the recording of the text that you're working from, and then you are going to interpret that chunk of content. Then you would play the next piece of the tape and then stop it where you're comfortable and then interpret that. And continue doing this consecutive practice until you're very comfortable holding on to that information for that period of time and then delivering it. And you'll find that your delivery is more effective because you can be fluent, because you're not under the pressure of this timed, limited time that you have while you're interpreting simultaneously. And then the last thing you would do is practice interpreting that very same text. You retold it, then you practiced interpreting it consecutively, and then lastly, you're going to practice it doing simultaneous interpreting so that you've worked with the same material in 3 different modes. What this gives you also is it helps improve your short-term memory because you have to hold on to that content. When you're doing the retelling, you can reference notes, that's okay, but you don't want to be reading from that as you're retelling in sign language the story that you have selected. And then when you're doing consecutive interpretation, the same thing applies. You're listening to short chunks that you have to remember, and then you can deliver those. So as your short-term memory improves by engaging in these activities, when you're simultaneously interpreting, you should begin to get more comfortable using a longer process time to allow you to end up with the same result, a more effective interpretation by using additional process time. So those strategies are just the ways that I have recommended to people, and they have found them to be helpful in improving that short-term memory, which then does give you that confidence. Because most interpreters say the reason I'm afraid to use my process time for very long is I'm afraid I'll forget some information. So improving short-term memory and then having the confidence that you can hold on to that information will help when you are simultaneously interpreting in the classroom.
How is the performance assessment scored?
That's a great question. People always want to know how it is we go about scoring your performance work. Well, we are working with a team of raters. We always have a deaf individual and a hearing individual, at least those 2 components on a team. Teams can be composed of 2 to 3 raters. It's really important to have that balance because deaf people see things maybe more visually acutely than hearing persons do. So we have that combination, so it's kind of a check and balance. What we're doing when we're watching your interpretation is we are looking for patterns, not isolated incidents of an error or a weakness. We are looking for patterns. We're looking for the patterns that you produce across all of the classrooms that you interpret. So people will say, well, you know, I had a pause at this time because I thought I heard something in the room and I don't want to be penalized for that. We're not going to penalize you for one incident that we saw. We're looking for patterns. So this is a pattern that's going to exist across all 3 of the classrooms that you interpret. What we do as a team is we observe your interpretation and we watch maybe the first 5 to 7 minutes together. Then we'll pause the tape and we have a discussion with each other regarding what are the major patterns that you see, or what are things that we are going to watch for based on what we've already seen. So then we will continue this, this watching of the 3 classrooms, and we are taking copious notes about examples of everything that we see, and those examples are going to help us when we refer to the Rater Manual to determine what scores we assign. We have a rubric that very clearly outlines what percentage we're expecting to see to be able to assign a specific score. So, for example, if we're looking at your fingerspelling production, and if you have one weakness in fingerspelling production, and say maybe that weakness is your fingerspelling production is too fast for the age of the student that you're interpreting for. So if you're interpreting for the elementary portion of the test, we anticipate that fingerspelling is going to be produced a little bit slower than it would be for students in secondary settings, because younger students are still learning to read fingerspelling, and we want to support that. So, so we're looking at every skill set, but we're not looking at isolated incidents within that skill set. We're looking for the patterns. When it comes time for us to assign scores, we assign those scores as a group. We discuss where we think the person is on the rubric, and we have to be somewhat in agreement. And the reason is if I explain it to you this way, if one person says they saw 52 fingerspelled terms in one lesson and the other rater only saw 10, obviously one of them is not right. So we have to maybe rewind the tape. We have to show our notes of the examples that we saw that influenced how we assigned the score that we gave to the person. So that's how we do the scoring. And when it comes to writing the report, the team collaborates on the type of feedback that we are going to assign you within each of the Romans and on the front page. The front page of your report is where we really as a team talk about what are the priority areas that we see for you specifically that we think will enhance your interpretation the most quickly if you focus on those areas. So we try to put 3 to 4 areas on the front page, which should be your priority areas that you focus on. But then you have an additional 4 pages of copious notes of feedback to help support you. So that's how we rate, and hopefully that will help you understand a little bit better what it is we do when we're looking at your work.